Have you ever painted a mini that came out looking like a melted crayon? Well, in this video, I'm going to give you 5 tips to avoid that in the future. My name is Jesse and I am that tabletop guy. If you've ever painted a miniature that looks like a melted crayon, you've seen firsthand just how important a good base coat is to the finished product of your paint job. Base coating is one of those fundamental skills that seems very simple on the surface, but has a huge impact on the quality of your paint job. A bad base coat makes it harder to have a good painting experience, whereas a good base coat sets up a good foundation for a great paint job. A lot of YouTubers gloss over base coating like we're all born knowing how to get that silky smooth finish. In this video, I'm giving you 5 tips to get the best base coat possible for your paint job. And to get things started, we're going to take a look at how we thin our paint to the proper consistency. Most paints are too thick to base coat our mini effectively straight out of the bottle or pot. This means we need to put some paint in our palette and thin it with water to get the proper consistency. Our goal is paint that goes on thin, but opaque with good coverage. To thin our paint, we load up a bit of water in our brush and then we work it into the paint on our palette. Add small amounts of water at a time. We can always add more water, but we can't take it back out if it gets too thin. I like to aim for a consistency like whole milk or melted ice cream. A nice, smooth consistency with no ridges that covers well. Now that we know how to thin our paint, let's take a look at how we test it to make sure it's not too thick and not too thin. In order to tell if our paint is too thin or too thick, you can paint a line on the palm of your hand. You're looking for paint that doesn't show any ridges, but also looking to be as opaque as possible, meaning you don't see a lot of flesh tone showing through the paint. At this point, we have a good grasp on how to thin our paint to the proper consistency and how to check it to make sure we're there. Now, let's take a look at some paint that is too thin and some paint that is too thick. Let's demonstrate the difference between thick and thin paint on this empty base that I primed white. First, I'm going to paint the bottom of this base with paint straight from the bottle. Notice the visible ridges in the paint. This is going to create unwanted texture that will make it difficult to wash and highlight the model later. Now, let's thin our paint way down and see what that looks like. We don't see any ridges, but we also don't have great coverage either. Notice the large amounts of white showing through the green paint. This time, we are going to thin our paint a bit and paint that white space in the middle. Notice the smoothness of this third application. No ridges, but we do see light brush strokes, so that means the paint could have been a little thinner. We also don't see any white shining through, which means we have full opacity. Now that we know how to get our paint just right, let's talk about the proper way to load up our paintbrush. Loading paintbrush is one of those skills that a lot of YouTubers don't really talk about, but a properly loaded brush makes it easier to get a good quality finish on your paint, as well as keep your brushes lasting longer. Now, let's talk about loading our brush. The key thing to remember here is to only let the paint go about halfway up the bristles at most. If you get paint up into the area where the bristles are bound to the handle, otherwise known as the ferrule, it's going to cause your brush to splay out as the paint dries. Take your brush and dip the tip into your paint and allow the bristles to soak up some of the paint. I usually load up between 1/4 and 1/3 of the way up the bristles. When it comes time to apply the paint to your model, use the side of the brush and not the very tip. This will keep your brush coming to a sharp point and you can manipulate the angle to get either a thick line or a thin sharp line. Now that we have a firm grasp on the painting fundamentals, including thinning our paints and loading our brush properly and applying the paint, let's talk about the strategy behind how we approach our base coating step on our miniature, and let me show you a simple way to get the best base coat by painting inside out. At this point, we are ready to put paint on our mini. I prefer to paint inside out, which means I start with the innermost detail, which is usually the skin or armor, and work my way to the outermost detail, which is usually weapons. This technique ensures that I hit the hard to reach places first, so if I get paint where it doesn't belong, I'll just paint over it anyway when I get to that step. If I were to paint from the outside in, painting the weapons and then the details first followed by the skin last, I may accidentally paint over an area that I've already painted when I go for those hard to reach areas on the skin. This means I have to go back and paint over those mistakes, adding time to the project, and can be a source of frustration. And there you have it, 5 key things you need to know about the base coating step of the mini painting process to set your miniature up for the best chance of success. We've covered it all from thinning paint to loading our brush, to even a good strategy for approaching how we paint our miniature. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and hit the like button. If you liked a few videos of mine, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously and it's free. Now go out and get your tabletop on.